Hello YouTube, I'm Totu and today I'm here to discuss the potential playable races in Riot's upcoming MMORPG. I know this has been covered by certain YouTubers like Necrit or Dasher in great detail, but I have a few things I could add to the discussion, so I decided to make this video. First of all, let's clarify why we can only really expect certain races to be playable in this game and not others. I would say there are about 4 criteria they have to meet to even have a chance of becoming a playable race. And these 4 are: 1. They have to be intelligent, obviously we're gonna talk to people in this game. 2. They have to be roughly humanoid, because they will have to use stuff like swords or guns to fight. Otherwise, they would have to make unique weapons and unique classes just for a race. For example, dragons are intelligent enough to talk to people, but I highly doubt we would actually get a chance to play as a dragon. 3 is that they have to qualify as people rather than monsters. I know there are creatures like undead and some voidborn that can talk, but that doesn't really mean much when quite literally any person would want you dead on sight, obviously. And the fourth criteria is that there has to be enough of the race to justify like 20,000 of them running around in a city. There are races like Nico's race that has like 2 confirmed members. In my opinion, the 5 races that actually met these criteria are humans, obviously, the Vestaya, obviously, Yordles, Minotaur, and Trolls. But they could also have sub-races. For example, Trolls have the ice trolls up north in the Freyjord, like Trundle, for example, and the sand trolls, like Jacks. They are somewhat different. The sand trolls are smaller and generally a lot more adjusted to actual society, while the ice trolls are more monsters, so making ice trolls a playable race would be a bit difficult. But some of the others I mentioned, mostly Vastaya, have great many forms, and you can make at least 3, but up to hundreds of races out of that. But in my opinion, the route they should choose is making humans into multiple races like in the Elder Scrolls franchise. And the reason they should do this is simply because most of the people living on Runeterra are humans. I would say around 90% of the characters are. And they are quite literally everywhere. From Freyjord to Shurima, every climate, every type of land, islands, tundra, desert, forest, they live everywhere. So it wouldn't really make sense to have one set of racial traits. Obviously, someone in the Freyjord, especially the Iceborne, would have very, very different preferences and capabilities than someone living in, let's say, the Ishtali jungles. Every time multiple human races are brought up in the discussion around this game, one of the problems brought up is that there wouldn't be enough differences between them to actually tell them apart. And I understand that this is a problem, because normally we can tell them apart, but we can do that based on what they wear. Winter Scroll Raider looks very different from, let's say, Solari, but that's only when you look at their clothes. When you look at the actual people, just their bodies, they look basically identical. But I think this could be solved just on a writing level. What the Elder Scrolls does is basically making especially the Nords very, very different from, let's say, the Imperials. You can't necessarily tell that a Nord is a Nord from a glance, but you can definitely tell that a Nord is a Nord when they start talking to you. Even on a visual level, there are things we could do. For example, character creation could have certain tattoos or decorative ornaments that are specific to certain types of people. For example, the Freyordians have tattoos, the Buhuru have different tattoos, the Solari and Lunari have very specific colored jewelry. Not every region has to have its own race. I would say Demacians, Noxians, and Piltovans are rather similar in many ways. They have similar culture, similar general art style. Obviously, the Piltovans are more technological, the Demacians are more anti-magic, and the Noxians are more warlike. But the people don't really act all that differently in an everyday situation. Like a Noxian painter and a Piltover painter probably has similar lives to a Demacian painter. In my opinion, we could probably group these three together into a general Valoran Ian race and just leave it as the most general basic version of human, and then have a separate race for either just Shurima or Shurima and Ishtal, and then one more for Freyord. As for the Ionian humans, I don't really know what to do with them, because they live in a fairly peaceful environment, but they are also very different in culture from the likes of the Martians and whatnot. I suppose they could be a separate race, but then again, they don't really have traits that would make sense for a separate race like that. Maybe like spirit magic based something? Whatever. Whatever. For Vastaya, I propose about 3 separate races. One would be the very animalistic type of Vastaya, like Rengar. They are basically 90% animal, and really only the posture and the reversible thumbs are kind of human-like. Then one more would be the mostly human kind of Vastaya, something like, let's say, Ori. Obviously, Ori is a special kind of Vastaya, she's the last one and whatever, but there are a lot of Vastaya like her that are mostly like 90% human-like in appearance. Zaya and Rakan are also kinda like that. And the last one, the more interesting one in my opinion, would be the sea or just general water-based Vastaya. Nomi is something like that, but I'm obviously not proposing someone with a mermaid-esque appearance. As I have stated before, that would pose problems because shoes kind of have to be an item in the game, and probably humans, normal as Vastaya and Yordos will wear the same kind of shoes. I really don't see a character that has a biggest fishtail instead being in the game. But we could have basically fish people with 4 normal human limbs in the game. There's also a chance for a flying Vastaya, but that really depends on how much they want to have flight in the game. They could choose to not have it at all, or they could choose to just restrict it to certain flight paths. But if free flight is in the game, a winged version of the Vastaya race is kind of likely as well. I think both Yordos and Minotaurs should just stay as one specific race, because Minotaurs really just kind of live on Valoran, and even there are very few of them. And Yordos, while they live kind of everywhere, it wouldn't really make sense to have a special kind of separate race for Yordos, because the only special ones we know of, Fez and Nar, are the only ones of their kind. As I have said before, Centaurs are by far the most likely version of the troll to actually make it into a playable race. But I suppose ice trolls would be fun if they could make it make sense, because ice trolls are really violent and really stupid. They could also just add new races to the game, because there are continents, or at least one continent, that we haven't seen before on the Runeterra map. That's where Kamavor, the place where Viego the Ruined King came from. And there are probably other countries on that continent, and maybe islands or more continents around that area that we haven't seen before. So who knows? Maybe this land has humanoid, I don't know, dragons, like, the new WoW expansion have those, or humanoid pandas, or fuck knows what else. But for now, I would say these are probably the options, and just from what I mentioned, we could already get like 10 races, and that's more than enough in my opinion. Of course, all of this really depends on how far they are willing to push racial traits as a system. Some games don't really like to make a specific race all that different from another race, to make sure the players get to customize their characters based on appearance and not have to actually metagame it. But at the same time, I often prefer if races have a strong defining characteristic, because it makes making a new character more interesting. Obviously, I would prefer if the characteristics of these races were more general purpose. For example, I don't want to see stuff like this race is better at magic. In Skyrim, that was a big problem. Races like Breton, High Elves, and Orcs basically beat everything else by a country mile. Orcs just randomly had an ability that made them 4 times stronger. High Elves had more mana from the beginning and had an ability that essentially gave them infinite mana for a time. And then Bretons had more magic resistance, and they could activate an ability that gave them 50% magic absorption, and if they had another 50% from somewhere, they could basically become immune to magic for a while. They were very overpowered, and there was really no point picking other things. And there was also just no point making something like a high elf that wasn't using magic, because it wasn't supported. I'm not entirely sure what they will go for. I would prefer if making a character had some real decisions to it, and it wasn't just cosmetic. But it's really up to them. So anyways, thank you for watching. Leave a comment down below to help me see that actual people are watching this video and I didn't just waste many hours making it. And have a nice day.